You know, Batman was always really popular, but this trilogy was so successful, you can say his popularity really rose. The Dark Knight Rises is the final film in the Dark Knight Trilogy and sees Christian Bale return as Bruce Wayne, who has been in hiding for 8 years, with Batman now a fugitive. However, he's forced to come out of hiding to save Gotham once more when a mysterious terrorist known as Bane, played by Tom Hardy, arrives with the intent of destroying the city. Welcome back to my Christopher Nolan series. For those of you who are new here, I'm going through each of Christopher Nolan's movies and reviewing them one by one. This is a lead up to Tenet, which is getting released in at least some theaters on September 3rd. With things still up in the air with the pandemic, it's unclear what will definitely be open by then and who will see it when, so it may still be a bit before I actually get to a review of Tenet, depending on how it goes, but we'll see. I've already reviewed 7 of Nolan's movies, and I'll leave a link to that playlist in case you missed any of them. And not including Tenet, we only have 2 movies to go, so to catch those as soon as they're out, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with any and all new reviews. But now, let's talk about Nolan's 8th movie, The Dark Knight Rises. Once again, I will give my warning as I did for most of Nolan's movies. This is fairly popular, and it's been 8 years since it's been out, so I will be discussing some spoilers. I normally don't do this in my reviews, especially for new releases, but there were some plot points I feel are necessary to bring up. So if you still haven't seen it by now, please go watch the movie, then come back to this. But anyway, here we go. After the massive success of The Dark Knight, the hype for this movie was through the roof, especially with Nolan once again proving his strength as a filmmaker with Inception right after The Dark Knight. And it's funny, even with the way The Dark Knight ended, essentially on something of a cliffhanger, Nolan once again wasn't entirely sure if he was going to return for a third movie. This was similar to what happened right after Batman Begins, and this time it was partially due to the death of Heath Ledger. David Goyer had written a treatment for a third film not long after Batman Begins was out, and part of his treatment involved the Joker. Plus, it was confirmed Ledger was set on coming back for another movie before his tragic death. So Nolan wasn't sure if he was going to come back to this at first out of respect for Ledger, and didn't have anything else in mind at first as a backup story. Especially since Nolan is a man with a vision, and he didn't want to just force a story for the sake of making another movie. He wanted to make sure that there was something there for him with actual emotional investment. And I can really respect him for that, because no matter what you ultimately think of each of his movies, you know at least there's a certain passion coming from them, and he's never doing something just to be cheap or just to churn out a movie. Nolan ultimately went with Bane as a villain for this movie, which was a good choice. He was originally asked to use the Riddler, but with the Riddler and the Joker having some similar traits, he wanted to go in a different direction. And I'm glad he did so, as it helps give the movie its own personality while still being closely linked to both Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. That being said, while this is a good movie, I'd classify this as the Return of the Jedi of the Dark Knight trilogy. And by that I mean is, Return of the Jedi is a good movie. I very much enjoy it, and it makes for an overall strong ending to the original Star Wars trilogy. But Return of the Jedi is simply not on the same level as A New Hope or The Empire Strikes Back, which were both excellent movies. And this is pretty much the same situation. This is overall a very good movie, but it has more noticeable flaws than either Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. And funny enough, it suffers from some of the same problems as Return of the Jedi did. Both movies have much stronger second halves than they had first halves. So I'm going to start with the negatives for this first, which I don't always do, but might as well, considering most of the issues stem from the first half. So as I mentioned, Bane is a villain with a personality very different from the Joker, and he helps give this movie its own unique feel. However, that's more as you get into the second half. The first half of this movie deals extensively with the fallout from The Dark Knight, to the point that it almost would have served better if it was like a short interlude movie that bridged 2 main movies. It catches us up to what Bruce has been doing for 8 years since he's lived his life as a recluse since The Dark Knight. It deals with tying up the loose end of the Rachel love story from the last movie. There's what happened to Wayne Enterprises and Lucius Fox's role in the company. There's the brief subplot of Alfred leaving Batman. And then on top of all that, because he hasn't been Batman for 8 years, we get an extended period of time dedicated to him training himself to be Batman again, which is essentially a rehash of Batman Begins, which focused partially on Bruce's training. And then on top of all this, there are so many new characters that get introduced here and play an important role in the movie. In addition to Bane, we have Marion Cotillard as Miranda Tate, Joseph Gordon-Levitt as John Blake, Anne Hathaway as Selena Kyle, Matthew Modine as Gordon's new second-in-command, and Ben Mendelsohn as one of the executives in Wayne Enterprises, who also has a very complex relationship with a number of the characters. And this is on top of all the Dark Knight fallout. It is a lot. This is a 2.5-hour movie, almost 3-hour movie, and there's still just not enough time dedicated to giving a lot of these characters the attention they need. Selina Kyle, for example, is actually not in the movie as often as memory may serve you, or as much as the movie advertises. Like, it's not just a cameo, but she kind of comes and goes and will disappear for decent amounts of time. And I know Catwoman and Batman have been involved romantically in the comics, but here they don't spend nearly enough time together to really warrant this seemingly close relationship they have towards the end. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, while he gives an overall good performance and is actually a likable character, he does have one of the most contrived moments in the entire movie, and this was honestly something I just could not buy. He deduces Batman's identity because he saw Bruce Wayne once as a child and noted the look in his eyes, and it's a similar look that he had. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It's a huge suspension of disbelief right there. Just total jumping the shark. I was able to buy the Wayne Enterprises employee in the last movie figuring out Batman's identity way more than this. It seemed like they really just needed a quick way for Bruce to be convinced to come out of retirement, and they were kind of grasping at straws with this one. I also have an issue with Bane to a degree. He is actually, for the most part, an effective villain. His opening scene is one of the best parts of the movie, though after that, he doesn't get his chance to pack the same punch as the Joker or even the Scarecrow until we get to the second half, because we only see him so many times in the first half. Like I said, there's just a lot of Dark Knight fallout we're dealing for this first hour or so. Once we learn more about him though, he's great. Up until the very end. The twist involving Miranda Tate, who also turns out to be Talia al Ghul, is not all that well done, to be honest. Maybe if it was revealed earlier, I wouldn't have minded it so much, but you spend so much time, like over 2 hours of the movie, building Bane up as this menacing, terrorizing figure. He's clearly a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He shows close to no mercy to anyone who gets in his way, even his own henchmen. He has this big plot to destroy Gotham and has clear motivations for doing so, and in the last few minutes it's revealed he's nothing but a lackey and not the real mastermind behind any of it. It turns out Talia al Ghul is the one behind all this, and he's nothing but an enforcer, and he just turns into this silent lackey for like the last 5 to 10 minutes on screen, almost in the vein of what he was reduced to in Batman and Robin. It's just a total disservice to the character. He has one line, maybe 2 lines after that reveal, and it just totally invalidates what was otherwise a great villain and rubbed me the wrong way that it played as this last minute gotcha moment. Now, despite all my criticisms, I do want to reiterate this is overall a very good movie, and the first half isn't unbearable to get through. There were some solid moments. Like I said, the first scene with Bane is great, and anytime he shows up during the first half was a big highlight in this part of the movie. Also, whenever Selina Kyle is getting the one-up on some of the organized crime figures she's involved with, those make for some fun moments, as is our initial encounter with Bruce. I'd also say anytime we get to see Gordon was always a plus. While I mentioned the first half of the movie deals a lot with the Dark Knight fallout, a nice character moment during all of this is Gordon having to deal with the emotional burden of knowing the truth between Batman and Harvey Dent and still carrying it with him all these years later. So those made for some good moments. Plus we get to see a little more of Morgan Freeman, which makes up for the fact that we don't get to see Michael Caine as much. Both of them provided some comic relief to ease up the tension in both Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and Freeman maintains that role here. Even as Wayne Enterprises is going down the tube, he's still cracking jokes along the way and trying to do what he can to help out. So there's that. Once we hit the part of the movie where Bane hijacks the football game, other than that one twist at the end I mentioned earlier, from here on out, it becomes consistently great. I had minimal issues with this part of the movie, and Nolan gets us back to the thrilling, emotional heights that was reached in the first 2 movies. From a technical standpoint, it's once again on point. Hans Zimmer's score brings about a much-needed sense of excitement and really gets your heart racing as the stakes get higher and higher. Wally Feister's cinematography is also fantastic. The shots are gorgeous, especially the wide shots of Gotham. The football game in particular is masterfully done, as are a lot of the shots of Gotham during Bane's takeover, and all the action scenes are done masterfully. There's especially one scene in the first half where Bruce finally reappears as Batman for the first time, and he's on his motorcycle and he's fighting people while he's being chased, and it's shot well, choreographed well, and considering it happens well into the movie, it just makes for the perfect re-entrance for Batman. The build up to this moment was just right, and you almost want to stand up and start cheering when you see Batman again. I will say, the one thing this movie has on Batman Begins in general is the action scenes. While I didn't dislike the Batman Begins fights, the shaky shaky cam is disorienting, which people took issue with. Nolan learned his lesson with The Dark Knight, making the fights a lot clearer to see, and he continued that style with this movie. The fights here are much smoother, easier to see, and as a result are very exciting. The fight between Batman and Bane at the end is particularly great. In fact, I think that's a big part of why I like the second half so much. So much is happening here, and it moves so quick after a rocky first half, and it gets things back on track. We still get plenty of character building moments, mainly by learning about Bane's backstory, as well as some nice character moments for Bruce, linking back to the first movie, but the massive fight between Batman and everyone in Gotham versus Bane's men is just phenomenal. And it's one thing after the other after the other. It moves ridiculously fast, and the pacing picks up exponentially. Plus, it still keeps an emotional core, and it does so by tying all three movies together. And that's something I'm really glad they did, because The Dark Knight was such a landmark film and overshadowed just about everything superhero related, let alone Batman related. It was sometimes easy, especially at the time, to forget about Batman Begins. At least it seemed that way to me then. I mentioned this in my actual Batman Begins video as well, but I honestly could be wrong there. I specifically remember people I knew calling this The Dark Knight 2, so yeah. And while this is very much a direct sequel to The Dark Knight, as I've mentioned countless times already, it still makes plenty of callbacks to Batman Begins, especially through Bane. He's not just another random villain terrorizing Gotham, but he's there to finish the work that Ra's al Ghul started in the first movie. And outside of the disappointing twist at the end, his connection to the League of Shadows didn't feel forced or contrived. Plus, we even got a Liam Neeson cameo towards the end in a hallucination of Bruce's, so that was cool to see. And we once again get a cameo by Cillian Murphy as Jonathan Crane, presiding over the kangaroo courts Bane starts up during his takeover. I thought Crane was actually a great villain in Batman Begins, and I was happy to see he wasn't totally forgotten about here, and it was just another nice way to link all the movies together. Plus, all the performances were great as usual. Bale is once again very good, though he doesn't get as much to do this time around. Even though he's still the star of the movie, he's actually sidelined for a good chunk of this. He spends the first half in seclusion, while he spends a portion in the middle locked in this prison that Bane puts him in, and he's forced to make an almost impossible escape. So he's not exactly as active as he was in the first two movies, but whenever he's on screen, he still brings the usual mix of charm and pathos. Tom Hardy also made for a great villain. While Inception brought him more to the mainstream, I'd say this was really the movie that put him on the map, and rightfully so. I gotta admit, the voice he uses for Bane can come off as silly from time to time, and it was, like Heath Ledger's Joker, one that a lot of people loved to imitate that year, but he had a very strong presence that made for an effective villain, and especially after that fantastic opening scene, you're able to buy him as a credible threat. One thing you can say about Tom Hardy in general is that no matter how the movie itself is, you always get a deeply committed performance from the guy, and that shows here. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was also very enjoyable, with Gordon sidelined for part of the movie and Batman out of sight. He takes the lead as the moral center. He's someone who wants to do the right thing and help others out, and he remains deeply committed to that. He tries to inspire others, and he's supposed to represent the next leader of a new generation in Gotham, and he conveys that well, especially since he has so much charisma. It just makes him a naturally likable guy. So even though he had the one contrived moment in the beginning I mentioned earlier, he made for a nice addition to the cast. Everyone else doesn't get as much to do. They kind of go in and out, but they're still good. I mentioned Morgan Freeman played up plenty of comic relief that helped ease some of the tensions and made up for Michael Caine's limited screen time, which was fun. And Caine himself was still very warm as usual. Even though he's only in the movie for so much, this is probably his most emotional performance in the entire trilogy, as he becomes gravely concerned for Bruce's well-being, and what he had to work with was nice. Gary Oldman also gave a solid performance. He spends part of the first half sidelined himself, and he doesn't play a bigger role until the second half. And like I said, he had some of the more emotional moments as he grapples with covering up some of the events from The Dark Knight. So once again, good job by him. Marion Cotillard probably had the least to do, and as I mentioned, I wasn't exactly the biggest fan of how they handled her character, but she did well with what she had to work with. Plus, Anne Hathaway was also a lot of fun as Catwoman. Some of the back and forth she has trying to double cross and undermine characters made for some nice comic relief as well. And Matthew Modine's role as the typical second in command who's more aggressive than the actual guy in charge was a bit familiar, but again, he worked well with the material. And Ben Mendelsohn kind of filled that role that Crane had in the first movie, being the closest thing we get to over the top in an otherwise grounded movie. He's this sinister corporate executive who liked barking orders at everyone if he didn't get his way, and he just enjoyed making other people's lives miserable, and he just made for someone who you enjoyed to hate. So nice job by the cast overall. While this isn't quite on the level of either Batman Begins or The Dark Knight, it's still a great end to a great trilogy. It takes up maybe a bit too much time in the first half, dealing with nothing but setup and a lot of the Dark Knight aftermath, but once it shifts gears in the second half and Bane is more front and center, it becomes consistently entertaining. It's once again visually stunning, has exciting fight scenes, plus plenty of great performances from a talented cast. Overall, it makes for a satisfying end to one of the best superhero trilogies out there. The Dark Knight Rises gets an 8 out of 10. 2 to go after this. Up next, we'll be talking about Interstellar. We see Nolan return to original filmmaking full-time and back in sci-fi territory. I'll have that review out within the next few days, along with more 2020 reviews coming soon. So let me know, did you see The Dark Knight Rises, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Was it your favorite entry in the trilogy, your least favorite, and what's one of your favorite movie trilogies of all time? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.